Welcome back to Talking with Dr. Laz, the favorite health program on television. This second segment, I'll be having Dr. Oyedun Olaitan. He's a consultant public health and community medicine physician, also a fellow of the National Postgraduate Medical College of Nigeria, and a senior fellow at the Academy for Health Development, AHED. He's joining us via Zoom. You're welcome to the program, Dr. Olaitan.
Thank you for having me. Good day, Dr. Laz, and to all the viewers. Thank you.
Also with me in the studio is Mr. Zacks Onwe. He's a women's sexual reproductive health and rights advocate. Incidentally, he's the producer of this program and a health communications officer at Talk Health Niger. You're welcome, Zach.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Olaitan, a couple of weeks ago, Academy for Health Development had this training or a meeting of fellows at Ileife, and that was followed up with a program in Lagos, and the issues were around promoting adolescent health, sexual reproductive health and rights, as well as family planning related issues. So during these 16 days of activism, how do you listen to Dorothy Njemaze, how do you relate issues of gender-based violence to what you are doing within the academy and working with the likes of Zacks, who are fellows in your program?
Thank you very much for the questions. And let me just say that Dorothy in the first segment actually nailed a number of issues on the head. Yes, we're getting a lot of things right regarding sexual and reproductive health and rights, particularly around gender-based violence, in between some of the laws that we're trying to domesticate, including the VAP law, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, and the improved coordination. I know Dorothy also talked about the improved coordination among the agencies, but to draw a common thread between what is happening within the sexual and reproductive health and rights space, I want to spotlight something we have done at the Academy for Health Development recently. While we're preparing for dissemination, a sneak peek is that earlier this year we did a national survey on sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria across 13 sites, 12 states and the FCT, just so that we can highlight what the issues are. Interesting findings are that among sexual and gender-based violence survivors, from our findings, we talked to a lot of women. We talked to 2,705 women across the country. About 760 per thousand women had experienced sexual and gender-based, had experienced some form of sexual violence. Now, what makes this perhaps a little more interesting is that of these women, about 121 of these women out of the 1,000 women we had spoken to had actually become pregnant as a result of the sexual violence they encountered. And the problem with this is that this further complicates their lives. There have been several other issues. But let me just quickly cone it down on some of the things that we have also discovered to be driving this. There are cultural, economic, and social factors. But when you look at some of our traditions and values, they support male aggressiveness and encourage a culture of silence. And this makes it very difficult for survivors to report cases of sexual violence. And let me quickly make a distinction here between victims and survivors. Survivors survive the event. I mean, they're alive to tell their story. A much sadder situation are the victims themselves, who are not even here to tell their stories. That is to show you how far sexual and gender-based violence can go up to women losing their lives.
Right.
But so beyond the culture of violence, we also know that there are a lot of other socioeconomic factors like poverty that forces child labor and encourages and exposes young children to all sorts of abuse. And of course, we have the peculiarities of insurgency in certain places, which is also increasing this.
Right.
Now, let me bring this all back to
Dr. Olaitan.
Contraceptive use.
Yes, Dr. Olaitan, I think you've made a very good point, trying to make these linkages. Because of time constraints, I'll come back to you, but let me talk to Zacks briefly in the studio. So Zacks, when we talk about GBV, a lot of talks around women and being disproportionately affected, and some critics have said that we are making too much, making
really.
mountain out of a molehill. Some persons are also like, oh, women, gender people are the ones driving this conversation, also ignoring men that are victims. So as a man who is an advocate in this, what's your motivation and what roles do you think that young men like you, need to play more in terms of checking this that the World, United Nations has kind of declared as what it sounds the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence?
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Lars. Yes, one question I often get is, why is it that we are always talking about women, women, women? Is it that men are not being abused, right? So for me, as a young person who has been in this space advocating for the right of women, is because I feel that, yes, men are being abused, right? But when we talk about the number of men that are being abused compared to that of women, there is a larger gap. And that's one of the motivations that has been why I keep, advocating for women. Right. Recently, I wrote a short story on Facebook, and it was about violence against women, and most especially on the issues of female genital mutilation. So when I shared the story on my Facebook page, I was shocked too, because I've just been hearing what people say, but I've not really seen people relating to stories that has to do like. So
Right.
so people were like, there were a lot of women who were like, this was what happened to me, this was what happened to me. So I feel that for me, these are some of the reasons we need to continue to say these things and speak it out there so that people will know that, yes, some of these things we are saying, we are not just making it up. These are realities of people's life, right? So it is something that when a woman is advocating for a woman, it's a different case. But men are major perpetrators of this act. So as a man advocating for it speaks a very large volume for me.
So some have argued that at young age, you should not just be talking to girls about how to dress, how not to dress. You should also be talking to boys, adolescent boys, on why they should not even attempt rape in the first place, whether as young people or as older people, or even why they should not force women, especially on issues that has to do with sexual violence. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think when we are raising our children, we should also all raise them. We shouldn't look at gender roles. They should be raised as kids or as children in the family, because some of these things, for instance, a lot of parents they have specific roles that they give their boy child to do, and then they give the girl child a specific role. So some of these things, they influence some of these actions as a child grow. But when you are raising up a child and you are making that child to understand that, okay, as a boy, there's no specific role that is meant for you, and as a girl, there's no specific role that is meant for you. So you begin to learn earlier on time. Right. So when certain actions begin to come up against something that, or from your peers, you begin to remember how you were trained at home. So raising up a child at the way that they should go is the best for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's get back to Dr. Olaitan to conclude this conversation. Dr. Olaitan, you're expert in this area. You've done a lot of activities and all of that. I know you have so much information to share, but unfortunately, we are constrained by time. We have to round up in the next couple of minutes. So issues around reproductive rights, you mentioned that 121 persons, who had sexual violence out of 1,000, had pregnancies they didn't plan for. And when we talk about unplanned pregnancy, issues around termination of pregnancy or abortion also come into play. And there's a lot of debates on whether in cases of pregnancies arising from rape, whether abortion should be an option or not. You may not, there are like parallel lines with people having very strong beliefs on that. But from the professional perspective, what is your recommendation in this regard on especially persons, adolescents, who have pregnancy as a result of sexual violence or rape?
Yeah, so that comes back full circle to the issue of contraception. One of the things that needs to be done quickly is to narrow the gap between reporting and response. I mean, some of these unplanned pregnancies could easily have been averted by making sure that both survivors and providers have the right information about contraceptive availability and use, particularly modern contraceptive methods. Beyond that, there also needs to be a policy push. I mean, there are several guidelines. You talked about the issue of the controversies around rape and abortion. Well, really, these are not controversies. I mean, there are several government guidelines, including the national guidelines on the safe termination of pregnancy, released just not too long ago, that is available to provide even guidance for providers to ensure that they are working within the ambits of the law in terms of providing safe services for survivors.
Okay.
So, in addition to that, you mentioned earlier that the Academy for Health Development, partnering with the Guttmacher Institute, New York, USA, did a dissemination activity on the 3rd of November this year, 2022. And one of the things we talked about was that we referred to a lot of the data that already exists. I mean, data points to the fact that a lot of even beyond sexual violence, a lot of young people, particularly girls who are sexually active, or nearly half of them that want to use contraception, but they're not using it. What that tells us is that there needs to be increased awareness. We need to bring in a multi-sectoral approach to it. We need to engage religious bodies. We need to engage cultural institutions. We need to get more CSOs involved in response. I know we already have people like Dorothy doing a lot, but we also need a lot more on board to ensure that this happens. And then finally, there needs to be a bigger push, not just on the part of government, but even funders and well-meaning individuals to provide, should I say, the critical funding and infrastructure for this response. I mean, in several places across the country, we have sexual assault referral centers, the so-called Zacks, that are available places for some of these survivors to go to.
Okay.
But beyond that, one of the things we talked about during the dissemination was the availability of a new tool called the Family Planning Investment Impact Calculator.
We really need to round up now.
It helps you to know that if you invest in contraception or family planning, which is not just for couples anyway, you're actually able to gain more when you look at what you actually gain in terms of unplanned pregnancies that you prevent, unsafe abortions that are prevented, and the entire healthcare costs in general.